Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar weekly discussion topic video. This one is going to be the next in my series of missed opportunities videos, and I'm moving on to Avatar The Last Airbender now, and the first book I'm going to cover here today is going to be Book 1, Water, first book of Avatar overall ever. So I think I might have said I would do it like 3-2-1 like I did Korra 4 3-2-1, but the one I really want to talk about first is Book 1 Water, so I'm just going to do it in normal order. So yeah, let's get into this. Book 1 Water, Missed Opportunities. As ever, I'll start off with what I feel Book 1 does well, the positives I have for Book 1. The positives are obviously that if this book wasn't good, no one would really continue to watch the series. So it does a lot right to obviously get people invested within the series. And obviously there are some great moments as you go through. I think it starts off exceptionally well with some really strong episodes. There's some excellent episodes in the middle of the season, as I'll kind of talk about a little bit as we go on. And it ends really well and does set up season 2, I think, really well as well. So I think that's like the main thing. It does that well. I think another thing is just that them keeping the main cast down to, 3 basically, Katara, Sokka, Aang, I think really works because you do really get to know them, that they are the original members of this kind of mission. They kind of led the kind of the quest for the first stage, and then in season 2 you get Toph, then you get the other characters coming on board, Team Avatar, but just focusing on those works, I think, really well. It ends up introducing a lot of like very interesting kind of side characters that come back later on, but I'll talk about that a little bit as we kind of go through here as well. And then, I don't want to spend too long talking about the positives because I do want to get to the missed opportunities. And it does a good job, I think, introducing you to what this universe is about. You get the idea of what the Avatar is, what bending is, the kind of hints is season 1, the hints as to the Avatar state and stuff like that. A little bit on spirituality, though I think I'll mention that as well in missed opportunities. And yeah, there's some good backstory stuff as well as we go through here, but I'll move on to the main gist from here on out. So, missed opportunities with Book 1. What are they? And for me, I think the main one is just that the format, the style of Book 1 instantly makes it, I think almost every Avatar fan, it's the weakest. There are obviously people out there who do like it as like their favorite book of Avatar, or rate, it's above some of the other ones, but I think most people would say it's pretty easy to just instantly put this as, yeah, it's kind of the bottom of the pile with the 3 books of Avatar. And the reason for that is just because it's the most inconsistent one, in that it jumps up and down in quality like pretty regularly through the season, whereas basically all of the other books, Korra included, Earth, Fire, Air, Spirits, Change, and Balance, are all like super consistent. Whereas with Book 1, it's like starts off really well, drops a little bit, goes up a little bit, drops a good bit, goes up again, drops a bit, and then up again. And it's just pretty huge, the jumps up and down. And I think that's the big thing, the overall quality of episodes. If you were like to kind of have an average of like episode rankings out of 10, Book 1 will be the lowest. And when I've done my list of overall, like out of 61 episode list, ranking them, Book 1 has the most towards the bottom. There are some that are really high up, but it's got the most consistent ones in the bottom. As I talked about in like the last video where I did my bottom 5 Avatar episodes, notice how like 3 of the 5 were from Book 1. 9, 10, and 11 were all on my list. The Waterbending Scroll Jet and The Great Divide. And then, like, close to the bottom, I think you have to put episodes like, Bottle of the Water Tribe isn't the best episode. And then, as much as there are fun aspects of a lot of the other episodes, stuff like Imprisoned, I think you do have to rate a bit lower. The Fortune Teller, you do have to rate lower, even though it's overall an episode I do really like. Even episodes like The Deserter, even though it introduces a lot of interesting things, I still think is a lower ranking episode within the overall series. And that's just the way it is. That this is us starting out. It's when the writing, they didn't perfectly know exactly where everything was going to play out. So, the writing on a lot of this stuff doesn't work out perfectly. I think 107, Winter Solstice Part 1, Spirit World, that is actually one of the weaker episodes as well. Even though it's part of our like mid-season two-parter that's meant to be really important, it's a very like all over the place episode with regards to what it's trying to get across. I'll get into more specific details. I'm just talking about the general episode thing. And notice how I've never really brought this up with any of the other seasons. As far as I'm aware, with any of the Korra seasons, I didn't really bring this up, that like, oh, the season has all these ups and downs, but this is definitely it. Like, it starts off really well. Like, I'll just go through all of the episodes here really quickly. 1, 2, 3, amazing start. I think 3 really adds a lot to the series, and it's an excellent episode. The Warriors of Kyoshi, I think, is good. Introduction of Suki, and like retroactively that makes the episode a little bit better. But I think on its own, it is not the greatest episode. King of Amashu is exceptionally fun. I think it's one of the funniest episodes of Avatar overall. Bumi's great as like a kind of minor character who comes back and is important later on. There's an important plot thing at the end that Bumi kind of sets them on their kind of structures their path a little bit going forward. But again, it's not really super plot focused. Imprisoned, I like it. A Katara, character focused episode. You get stuff about the Fire Nation. You get this stuff about the way what the war is doing. That the Fire Nation are actually capturing Earth Kingdom towns and taking their benders away, and that's interesting. And you see the kind of hope side of Katara, but again, not as big as perhaps it kind of should be. 107, as I said, I think this is a really weak way to introduce the spirit world. It's, I think, unnecessarily confusing in that we never see the spirit world, but I'll talk about it a little bit more. 108, really good episode, more about the Avatar. The episode that properly gets the plot going, adds the time crunch onto the series that, like, we need to get here and we need to do it quickly. The comet is the goal. Defeat Ozai before the comet. Master the elements. Do all this before that happens. This introduces it, and there's some really strong stuff with regards to the chase scene leading up there, the Zhao and Zuko rivalry and so on. Really well done. As I said in my bottom episode lists in the last video, Waterbending, Scroll, Jet, and The Great Divide all rank very low on my list. I think they're all relatively weak episodes, especially coming immediately after 108. And I think this is kind of leading into my next main point. Part of the problem with this series is that you get the time crunch in episode 8. How many of the episodes after that address the fact that they have to rush to get there quickly? Not a lot of them. Waterbending Scroll, okay, it's the one immediately afterwards. They start waterbending training. But they still don't, like, there's no intensity to the fact that, like, we need to do this quick to it. Then, like, Jet forgets about it. The Great Divide completely forgets about it. The Storm is an amazing episode. I think it's really good. One of the best in Book 1. Amazing backstory episode for Aang and Zuko, and what they do with it is just wonderful, the way they bring them together. It's a really important episode for Zuko especially. But again, they're kind of taking a break from, like, traveling far. Admittedly, the Storm kind of limits them from going far, but they still aren't really addressing the kind of overall main plot. But because it's so character focused, because the Storm at least gives somewhat of a distraction for why they should be away from it, it's one of the episodes you can kind of let fly by on that front. The Blue Spirit, again, is a really good episode. Like, for Zuko, for Aang and their relationship, it's really good. It's just, again, doesn't directly relate to the plot. Again, based off the Storm, they have the whole idea of characters getting cold and Aang needs to help them out before they can continue traveling. They add a reason, at least, to this one. And that's, I think, the difference with a lot of these episodes. The ones that are good is that they at least give you an explanation for why the traveling has slowed down a bit. The Fortune Teller is an example of an episode that doesn't really give you the best reasoning behind, like, why they stay there for so long. the volcano thing happens later on, but most of the villagers don't really listen to them, and they don't need to stay there. Admittedly, them staying there does help. It's just that it really isn't the greatest episode overall. Like I think it's fun because of the whole romance and how they play with that. The first proper addressing of Katara and Aang's relationship, and then just fun stuff going on in like the background and stuff like that. Meng is a very fun minor character, and it's all pretty good. It's just where's the intensity with regards to the plot? Bottle of the Water Tribe, again, they try and do some stuff here, but it's, again, they're forgetting about it. They take a break to just completely like, okay, Water Tribe person who isn't a waterbender, but let's stick around here for a really long time and, bring up the idea of maybe going back to the Water Tribe and stuff like that. The other thing I'll bring up with this episode is the repetition of an arc with Aang within this episode and then the next one, the Deserter. The whole idea of like, the whole season, there's been no real potential rift within the group. Then all of a sudden, Bottle of the Water Tribe, you present like Aang keeps the map to their father from Katara and Sokka. And then next episode, you also have him make a mistake with regards to learning firebending for the first time. Space that out a bit. You don't need to have the two of those two things happen immediately after the other. Because it's just like 15 and 16 are basically the Aang makes mistakes episodes. Like you could have easily had one of those, like 1 or 2 episodes after 8, and then have the Deserter down here. I'd highlight the Deserter as the more important plot point to have. So I like that one, and so I tend to think of Bato as the one where it's a bit more repetitive. The Deserter, I like that they at least try to have Aang like start another element. And it gives a reasoning behind why, when it later comes to firebending, the one that he's going to learn last, why there's going to be a big struggle with it. So it's a good setup episode. It introduces some interesting stuff about the Fire Nation, in that we're seeing Fire Nation characters who are potentially like sympathetic towards our hero's cause that aren't part of the Fire Nation military. It's interesting. And then we get to the Northern Air Temple. I think that's an interesting episode. Got a big battle in it. But it's not the most important episode of the series. It sets up stuff that happens much later on with regards to the kind of air power and so on. But and then the finale, I don't think there's a lot of criticism to really have of the finale. 18, 19, and 20, all excellent, because this is what the plot has been building towards, and then the actual plot, once they get there, turns out to be really good. So it's just little moments like that. As I said, we start off well, we have a dip with some more kind of character, not the most amazing episodes. The plot happens, dip, we go up for some stronger episodes, down again, and then up again. It's just inconsistency a little bit compared to everything else. And then just in general, the plot isn't particularly strong. The entire plot of Book 1 is get to the Northern Water Tribe as soon as possible, learn waterbending, boom, that's it. And there's the potential of an attack on the Northern Water Tribe happening as the series progresses. That's the plot. Like, you can get into specifics about like how this character's introduced here and comes back up later, but the main plot is that. And that's part of why like the last Airbender movie kind of struggles with regards to the plot, because there's not a lot there. In between the start, them finding out about the comet, and them arriving at the north, how do you choose what to leave in and what to leave out? Because it's all so random. Like, do you have to have Suki introduced in this episode? Do you have to have Boomy introduced here? Does the Imprison that episode have to happen at this point in time? Does Jet have to be introduced here? Does the Great Divide even need to happen? You're asking these sort of questions, and like there's only a couple of really important things that actually need to happen. Next point I'll bring up with is, I suppose I'll go for the spirit thing here. I go to a little bit more detail. Why I don't really like 107 is that it's an opportunity to really go in depth into how the spirit world works, functions, what spirits are full on. This should be an amazing like lore episode where we're finally learning a lot of world building aspects of this world. Unfortunately, it's a pretty confusing episode. I think even looking back on it now as someone who would kind of consider myself a bit of an expert on kind of spiritual mechanics in terms of how the Avatar world works with that sort of thing. This episode is still kind of like weird to think about when you go back to it, in that, as I said earlier, we never actually see the spirit world within this episode. We see Aang's spirit outside of his body in the physical world. And then we see stuff like the spirit of Fang, who is dead, come back into the physical world, but we never see how he gets out of the spirit world. Like, the Fang spirit is actually, like, super confusing when you think about it. In that, like, wait, if it's a spirit, what's going on there? Like, that is a really confusing aspect of it. Just the way they present Fang within the episode is just really doesn't make a whole heap of sense based on what we do know. And then the weird thing that they introduce of the fact that, like, Iroh can see spirits, and they present it as a pretty interesting plot point, kind of addressing the fact that he has had some sort of spiritual awakening where he can see spirits. But then, like, later episodes kind of, like, it goes back and forth on, like, certain characters can see spirits, certain characters can't. And then later on in Korra, the reveal later comes out that, yeah, spirits kind of choose as to whether or not people can see them or not, and it's kind of completely up to them. So, weird episode to kind of, I suppose, build the foundation for the spirit world aspects of things within the episode. And I think it doesn't necessarily work all that well. The other thing is that it introduces, like, Heibai, who can, like, go back and forth between the spirit world and the physical world, even though the portals are closed. And I get that, you know, okay, super powerful spirits can maybe do it, but, like, Rava and Vaatu, as far as we're aware, can't just make a portal there. Like, it seems like Heibai can do it, Wan Shi Tong can do it, and stuff like that. But again, inconsistencies within the episode. It's one of the other aspects of Book 1 that you can sort of see. There are a couple of points within Book 1 where you can sort of see they didn't have everything planned out. End of 102, Avatar Returns. The only time in the entire series where Iroh assists Zuko in attacking Team Avatar at the end. And he's a little bit out of character within that episode as well. But just the fact that after this point, like, Iroh would never help Zuko with that sort of thing. He kind of wishes Zuko wouldn't do this sort of thing and kind of gives him advice to go against it, but he never would help him, like, fire and attack the Avatar to get him back. So that's a kind of another inconsistency, as well as the way they present the spirit world. Thankfully, we do actually get to see the spirit world in episode 8, but it's weird that, like, the previous episode was called the spirit world, but we never actually saw it, and, like, Sokka was brought to the spirit world, and but we never actually see him in there, and then he doesn't really seem to make any mention of, like, oh, hey, the spirit world looked really cool. But then we later see it in this episode and then in the finale as well. I do like the spirit stuff in the Water Tribe once we get to it. The whole idea of Tui and Law, who are spirits who have taken kind of physical forms, and that means that they kind of have given away their immortality to have an effect on the physical world, and that's really cool. But again, I think a lot of people, when they criticize Book 2 spirits, go back to all this really vague spirit stuff back in Book 1 and be like, no, there's rules from Avatar Book 1 that kind of confirm why the idea of, like, dark and light spirits can't actually work and all this other stuff. And I always go back to the fact that, like, it presented everything so vaguely, not very effectively, that I would actually go as far as to say that, like, no, Korra Book 2 presents the rules, and you kind of have to try and fit ATLA into the rules that are later presented to us. Just because it's so clear that they didn't really know what they were trying to do back in Book 1 with spirits and stuff like that a lot of people say it's cool because they're so mysterious, but, like, I kind of use a different word instead of mysterious. I use vague, in that, like, no, it's just they didn't give us enough information, and that's a bad thing. That's not a good thing that we don't know a lot about the spirits within this universe. But anyway, let's move on to another talking point, and that's one I've also brought up before. I know I brought it up in the last video as well. This is Book 1 Water. We don't learn a lot about the philosophy of waterbending, and that's a really unfortunate thing. It's a point about Book 1 I don't really see brought up that much. and it's kind of weird to me that no one really brings it up. But why in a book called Water don't we actually learn a ton about waterbending and really how it works? And even then, almost all of it's confined to like the last couple of episodes, where we begin to learn a little bit about like the waterbenders and how they learned the push and pull from the moon and stuff like that. But they still don't really address kind of the core of what waterbending is. And part of the problem with it is the waterbending scroll episode. You establish within that episode that Aang actually can learn waterbending really easily. And he's actually a bit of a prodigy at it. If he puts himself into it and tries hard to actually learn it, he can learn it really easily. And not giving him any sort of a struggle with it really just kind of makes the plot not feel as great in book one. Because in Earth, at least what you have once you get down to the whole idea of like Toph's on the team, she's trying to teach Aang Earthbending, even though it's basically confined to the one episode, at least there was a struggle with it in terms of like finding the teacher first, the correct teacher, and then actually addressing Aang's issue with learning Earth, and it not being too much of a problem after that. Aang learns Earthbending pretty easily once he gets past the kind of initial block. With waterbending, we don't even get that. We don't get really any sort of a struggle. They later roughly mention that kind of Katara surpasses Aang at waterbending because he was trying to have too much fun and didn't really put himself fully into the training. And I suppose he learns better from Katara than he does from Pakku, so like his training continues. But he's still basically a master waterbender by the end of the season with very little effort. And I'll continue to bring this up every time I mention this point. The Last Airbender movie does Aang learning waterbending better than the show. And I get it's the cool thing to dislike the Last Airbender movie, but in this case, I think it's just true. Aang in the Last Airbender movie doesn't... the death of his people and kind of the effect that has on Aang in the movie has a big effect on him. He doesn't get over it until the very end of the movie. They link that big moment from like episode 3, basically like him finding out at the Southern Air Temple. They link that to his waterbending, that the way he approaches it is that he doesn't accept the loss of his people, that he kind of holds his emotion in about how he feels about it. And because he's not letting his emotions flow, he struggles with waterbending. And the whole time you get this sense of, as he's learning it and so on, that there's power there, that without this little blockage, he would get it quickly, because he's a skilled bender. But what's holding him back is the emotion. And then it leads to the big moment at the end where, assisted by the Avatar state, he finally lets the emotions flow, accepts his kind of duty as the Avatar, and they bring basically all of the key Aang plot points within Book 1 together into one big moment. And it actually works really well because excellent music is playing within the movie. It's addressing all of the key plot points. It's in the middle of a big battle scene, and this is what forces the Fire Nation to retreat. It's this massive kind of spiritual Avatar show of force, the power of water at its maximum, and that causes the Fire Nation to retreat. It's a really strong scene, and it's one of the ones where, like, I get a lot of people like the Last Airbender movie, and there's a ton of stuff in that movie to joke about. I don't think the last scene is really something to joke about, because I think it's actually pretty well executed. I say what you will about their approach to Aang's character with regards to like the way he's acted and stuff like that, but the idea, the basic points of his character arc within the movie, I think they should have done something quite similar to that within the show. I think you should have had the effect of the loss of Aang's people on him deal with that a little bit more, because every time I think about this, I'm like, wow, the show really didn't do all that much with it. They didn't really have the loss of Aang's people come back as a plot point all that much. Like, it's episode 3, and then I think they touch on it, like, obviously in the storm. They touch on it a little bit in, like, the Northern Air Temple, of course. It's slightly addressed. But outside of that, like, it's not really brought up all that much within the show. That the loss of his people and the fact that he is the last Airbender. Like, the name of the show, they don't really bring it up all that much, and it's I think a really big missed opportunity that they didn't use that to add a little bit more emotion to Aang's arc within book 1. It's really frustrating actually every time I watch book 1 from now when I see that they don't quite commit to that arc fully. I would have loved to have seen something where, like, okay, he gets the basics of, like, the little bits that Katara teaches him, but when it comes to properly, like, learning at the Southern Water Tribe, I would have liked the Waterbending Master to maybe have a more Aang-centric plot. Like, you have Katara have her kind of main plot within that episode, but also have Aang have this kind of side plot of, like, he is learning waterbending as Katara tries to get herself also included in the waterbending training. Aang dealing with his holding back on his emotions, holding him back from the waterbending training, and perhaps Katara as well as, you know, proving herself to Paku, and the big moment about the reveal with Gran comes out. Maybe Katara also helps Aang move a little bit past what happened with his people, and you get that big moment where he finally unlocks the kind of truth behind waterbending. I just feel they really should have done something more with that, and they did miss the mark not having something like that happen. What else do I really want to mention here? The only other thing I suppose is just, more specific about the Great Divide. It's super heavily, like, criticized within the fandom that it's the instant bottom of the pile episode within the series, by default. But as I said when I did my bottom 5 Avatar episode list, I think part of the reason the fans react about this episode the way they do is partly because of the way the creators dealt with this episode. Never referenced again until, like, the very end of book 3. Then when they do reference it, they just make a joke out of it. I don't think it's the best thing to just super make fun of your own show when you could have actually done something interesting. As I said, something as simple with the Great Divide as just having the leader of the Ganjian tribe and the leader of the Zhang tribe be part of the invasion. I think it's a baffling decision that, like, you have all of these characters come back. Even Hugh from the Swamp participates in the battle, and you don't have the leader of those two tribes. I don't get why they didn't include them there. Even if it was just for, like, a 1-second cameo moment where you see them in the background. They don't even, like, have a moment where our main characters go up and say, "Oh, nice to see you again, Ganjian tribe leader," and so on. Just visually in the background. I don't get why they didn't go for that. And I think that's part of the problem with this episode, and it highlights a problem with some of the other episodes within the series. In that book 1, there's a lot of episodes that are just like an episode, and here's a basic concept for an episode. We don't really know if this is going to mean anything, but here you go. And the big thing with the Great Divide is obviously, like, Earth Kingdom tribes. What does that mean? Like, there's water tribes, but we don't, as far as we're aware, what are Earth Kingdom tribes? Why is there a Ganjian tribe and a Zhang tribe when the Earth Kingdom is the one place where you'd assume that, like, are they really tribal at all? They seem to be more based around cities that have, like, kings, like Omashu and Ba Sing Se, and even the other places we go to have, like, kind of aristocrats and stuff like that, like Toph's family is, like, a pretty high noble family. Noble family is kind of what I was looking for there. Tribes doesn't necessarily fit with what the Earth Kingdom is about, so it very much felt like the Great Divide, like, it felt like it was written kind of as if it was like a filler episode, where, like, they just wrote a concept for the sake of a concept and didn't do anything with it after that. And it's little things like that in book 1 where there's episodes like that kind of highlight that point. But overall, I think I'm going to bring the discussion to a close there. I definitely in book 2 and 3, I won't have as much negatives to really say about them. This, by far and away, I think is going to be the longer of the videos within the Avatar Missed Opportunities series, because, as I said, I think most people will very readily admit, without too much of an argument, that book 1 is the weakest of the Avatar books. And you know, I still think there is an argument for it probably being the weakest of maybe all of the books, including Korra as well. Just because there's a lot of inconsistencies that, look, there are some important episodes here, but realistically, like, if you were rewatching the show, how many episodes do you really need to, like, go back to get the main points? I think you need to watch 1, 2, 3, 8, 12, 13, 18, 19, 20. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's like 9 out of 20 episodes you, like, are important. The rest of them are, like, good to, you know, some of them being average or below par. Whereas, like, if you really do that to the other books, are there many episodes you can cut out? Like with book 2, I don't think you can cut out too many. With book 3, some people would cut out a lot of the early season, but I do think the early season episodes of book 3 have much more to them than some of the lower level episodes of book 1, as I'll discuss when I get to book 3 Fire. But it's very clearly, for me, book 1 Water is the weakest Avatar book because of the main point being just inconsistency of episode quality. As well as that, there's probably some of the episodes that have the worst animation within the series, mainly because this is one of the seasons that has a DR Movie as one of the animation studios, and they're far and away the weakest animation studio that we've had on Avatar overall. Especially with some of their earlier stuff, it's really not all that great. But even then, JM Animation, I think, makes some errors as well in the early season as well. So I'm just going to end it there. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Book 1 Water, where you feel it misses the mark, what its strengths are, whether you agree or disagree with the points I've made. But next video is going to be Book 2 Earth, Missed Opportunities. Then we'll do Book 3 Fire, Missed Opportunities. And then, as I promised, we'll end this kind of sequence of videos with my top 5 Korra episodes and my top 5 Avatar episodes. So look forward to those videos coming out. And I'll just end by saying, link to my Twitter and Tumblr are in the description below if you want to follow me on social media. Link to my Patreon campaign and my PayPal donation link are also in the description if you want to help support my channel. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.